If today you would advocate a general strike as an effective tactic moving forward, and second, would you ever, if asked, allow for your voice to relay the democratically chosen will of our nation?
I'm not sure I understand. My voice wouldn't help. I can't even reach you. And besides, you don't want leaders. You want to do it yourself. Not that I could be one. We need representation, but you should pick it yourselves, and they should be recallable representatives. So you're not going to fall into some system of control and hierarchy. But this question of the general strike is like the others. You can think of it as a possible idea at a time when the population is ready for it. We can't sit here and declare a general strike, obviously. There has to be approval, agreement, willingness to take the risks, to participate on the part of the large mass of the population. And that takes organization, education, activism. Education doesn't mean just telling people what to believe. It means learning ourselves. There's a famous line of Karl Marx, which I'm sure you all know, that the task is not just to understand the world, but to change it. And there's a variant of that which also should be kept in mind. If you want to change the world in a constructive direction, you better try to understand it first. And understanding it doesn't mean listening to a talk, reading a book, although that's helpful sometimes. It means learning, and you learn through participation. You learn from others. You learn from the people you're trying to organize. And you have to gain the experience and understanding which will make it possible to maybe to implement ideas like that as a tactic. But there's a long way to go. That doesn't happen by a flick of a wrist. That happens by hard, long-term, dedicated work. And I think in many ways maybe the most exciting aspect of the Occupy movements is just the construction of these associations, bonds, linkages, and others that are taking place all over the place, whether it's a cooperative kitchen or something else. And out of that, if they can be sustained, can come and expanded to the large part of the population that doesn't even know what's going on. If that can happen, then you can raise questions about tactics like this, which could very well at some point be appropriate.
And we have two questions about the Occupy worldwide. How do you think we can effectively target problems to bring about change? And what should we make demands?
Yeah, well, they should have proposals and ideas. They don't have to be total agreement on them. There's good reason to let 100 flowers bloom. There's lots of possibilities. But there are very sensible proposals, starting from very short-term ones, to let's prevent the Deficit Commission from carrying out a really lethal blow against the society that might have lasting effects in the next couple of weeks. That's pretty short-term. There are longer-term things like, say, the ones I mentioned, helping the workforce in the Boston suburb I mentioned to take over their own industry instead of becoming jobless, going on to, say, maybe do the same thing with the whole auto industry. And there's many more things like that coming along. Turning the country to a leader in the effort to try to mitigate, maybe overcome the tremendous threat of global warming, instead of a follower, in fact, a leader in the practically the only participant in the campaign to accelerate the threat. All of those are things that you can do. We should have those proposals. Dealing with corporate personhood is another proposal, but I would suggest that it be broadened to deal with the distortion, gross distortion in the concept of person, which both broadens it to include corporate entities and narrows it to exclude people. People who have every reason to be treated as persons. And there are plenty of other demands you can think of. and they should be formulated. Maybe not everyone has to agree on the ranking of priorities or even the choice of demands, but groups can pursue them, and there's a lot that can be done.
Should we rewrite the system, and how can we mobilize the American public?
The only way to mobilize the American public that I've ever heard of, or any other public, is by going out and joining them. So going out to wherever people are, at churches, clubs, schools, unions, wherever they may be, and getting involved with them and trying to learn yourself from them and to bring about a change of consciousness among them. And again, this can be very concrete. I mean, take, say, the electoral system in the United States. You know, it has a lot of flaws, like what I mentioned, that public policy and public opinion are so radically divorced. But there's some narrower things that you can do something about right away. I mean, we're coming up to the primary system, okay? Suppose we had a functioning democratic society. Let's just imagine that. And what would a primary be? Say New Hampshire. What would happen in a primary would be that the people in a town would get together and discuss and talk about and argue about what they want policy to be. Kind of like what goes on here. And they should formulate their conception of what the policy should be. Then if a candidate says, I want to come talk to you, the people in the town ought to say, well, you can come listen to us if you want. So you come in, we'll tell you what we want, and if you can sort of persuade us that maybe you'll do it, maybe we'll vote for you. That's what would happen in a democratic society. But what happens in our society? The candidate comes to town with his PR agents and the rest of them, and gives some talks and says, look how great I am, this is what I'm going to do for you. Anybody with a gray cell functioning doesn't believe what he or she says. And then, you know, maybe they vote for him, maybe they don't. Now that's very different from a democratic society. And, you know, making moves in that direction is not utopia. Those are things that can be done in particular communities. And it could lead to a noticeable change in the political system. I mean, yeah, sure, we should get money out of politics, but that's going to take, a lot of work. And one way to go at it is just to elect our own representatives, and it's not impossible. And you know, the same is true all across the board. I mean, let's go back to the deficit again. The population understands that it's not the primary problem. In fact, not even a major problem. The population has a sensible attitude about what ought to be done with it. Higher taxes for the rich, let's go back to the way things were during the big growth periods, and preserve the benefits, which are limited. They ought to be improved. But there's something else which isn't even being discussed. The deficit would be eliminated, literally, if the United States had a healthcare system of a kind that other industrial countries have. You know, that's literally true. And that's not utopian. You know, the idea that we should have a healthcare system like other industrial countries, that's not kind of wild, radical raving. But that would not only get rid of the deficit, it'd probably leave a surplus. The U.S., I'm sure you all know, has its healthcare system's a total international scandal. It's about twice the per capita costs of comparable countries, some of the worst outcomes. Huge number of people just uninsured altogether. That's going to get worse. The problem's not Medicare. Medicare is indeed a problem. They talk about that, but it's a problem because it goes through the privatized, unregulated system, which is totally dysfunctional. Well, you can't talk about this in Washington because of the power of financial institutions. The public, a large part of the public wants it. In fact, for decades, substantial parts of the population, often big majorities, have been in favor of this, but it can't be talked about. Too much power now of financial institutions. Well, that can be changed. You know, it's not pie in the sky. And to the extent that the deficit is a problem, that's one thing that can be done about it. The other thing that can be done, you all know about, our crazed military system, which has